All rights to the characters and storyline of Fruits Basket belong solely to its creators and copyright holders. This text is a fan-created interpretation and does not claim any ownership or official affiliation with creators or distributors of Fruits Basket. All references to the characters and their development are based on the original work and are intended solely for entertainment and discussion purposes. Warning: this text contains discussion and depictions of eating disorders, which may be triggering for some readers. Please proceed with caution and prioritize your mental health. If you or someone you know is struggling with an eating disorder, help is available. Reach out to the National Eating Disorder Association helpline at 1-800-931-2237 or visit their website at www.nationaleatingdisorder.org for support and resources. Puppet Strings, Chapter 1. Tohru walked into the dojo, her face lighting up with a warm smile as she saw Kyo instructing a group of young students. She always loved watching him teach. His passion for martial arts was contagious, and the kids adored him. Many of the parents had gotten to know her over time and often greeted her with friendly waves and smiles. She felt a sense of belonging and pride as Master Kyo's wife. Today was no different, and Tohru found her usual spot at the back of the dojo, where she could observe without distracting anyone. She settled into a chair, smoothing out her skirt as she watched Kyo demonstrate a new technique with his usual intensity and grace. The children followed his movements with rapt attention, their eyes wide in admiration. Tohru's heart swelled with pride. She was enjoying the scene when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she found herself face to face with a woman she recognized but didn't know well, a mother of one of the more troublesome students. The woman had a reputation for being difficult, and Kyo had mentioned his frustrations with her and her son's behavior more than once. "Hello," Tohru greeted politely, offering a smile. The woman didn't return the smile. Instead, she looked Tohru up and down with a critical eye. "Are you expecting?" she asked bluntly. Tohru blinked, taken aback. "Oh, no, I'm not," she replied, confusion evident in her voice. The woman raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. "Really? I thought you might be. It looks like you've gained some weight." The comment hit Tohru like a slap to the face. Her smile faltered, and she felt a pang of hurt and embarrassment. Struggling to maintain her composure, she excused herself and moved to the other side of the room, her mind racing with the woman's words. Kyo, ever perceptive when it came to Tohru, noticed her sudden change in position and the distressed look on her face. As soon as he had a moment, he approached her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. Tohru hesitated, but then nodded. "Yes, I'm fine. It's just—" She trailed off, biting her lip. "That woman asked me if I was expecting. When I said no, she told me she thought I was because it looks like I've gained weight." Kyo's expression darkened, his jaw clenching in anger. He glanced over at the woman, who was now watching her son without a care. "I'll go have a word with her," he said, starting to move away. Tohru quickly placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "No, Kyo, it's okay," she said, giving him a reassuring smile, despite the hurt still lingering in her eyes. "I don't want to cause a scene." Kyo looked torn, his desire to defend Tohru warring with his respect for her wishes. After a moment, he sighed and nodded. "All right, but if she says anything like that again, I won't stand by." Tohru leaned up and kissed his cheeks. "Thank you, Kyo. I appreciate it." He kissed her softly on the lips before returning to his class, though his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer, still filled with concern. As the class continued, Tohru watched Kyo teach with a new, nagging sense of self-consciousness that she couldn't shake. The woman's words echoed in her mind, casting a shadow over what was usually a joyful experience. She tried to push the thoughts away, focusing instead on Kyo's dedication and skill, but the hurt remained, a small seed of doubt planted in her heart. After the class ended, parents and children alike gathered their things, chattering animatedly about the day's lesson. Tohru helped tidy up, her movements a bit slower and more distracted than usual. She felt the woman's eyes on her occasionally, and each glance sent a fresh wave of self-consciousness through her. Kyo approached her as the last students filed out, his expression softening when he saw the lingering sadness in her eyes. "Tohru," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You sure you're okay?" Tohru gave him a brave smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, I'm sure. It's just—" What she said really caught me off guard. I've never thought about my weight like that before. Kyo's eyes flashed with anger again, but he took a deep breath, keeping it in for Tohru's sake. "You're perfect just the way you are. Don't let someone like her get to you. She doesn't know anything." Tohru's smile became a bit more genuine at his words. "Thank you, Kyo. I know I shouldn't let it bother me. It's just hard not to think about." He pulled her into a tight hug, resting his chin on the top of her head. "You're beautiful, Tohru. Inside and out. Don't forget that." They stayed like that for a moment, drawing comfort from each other's presence. When they finally parted, Tohru felt a bit lighter, though the woman's words still lingered at the back of her mind. Puppet Strings, Chapter 2. A couple of days had passed since the unpleasant encounter at the dojo, but the woman's comments still echoed in Tohru's mind. She found herself fixated on the idea that she might have gained weight, a thought that gnawed at her incessantly. With Kyo at work and the house to herself, she decided to take a closer look. Standing in front of the full-length mirror in their bedroom, Tohru scrutinized her reflection. She turned from side to side, examining herself with a critical eye. It was true. She had gained some weight. Her clothes fit a bit tighter, and her once flat stomach had a slight curve to it. The realization hit her hard, and suddenly it was all she could think about. Determined to do something about it, Tohru began to change the way she ate. She started by eating a little less at each meal, hoping it would make a difference. She skipped breakfast, had a small salad for lunch, and ate half portions at dinner. But as days turned into weeks, she found herself eating less and less, until she was hardly eating at all. She pushed away the hunger pains, telling herself it was for the best. Kyo, busy with his work at the dojo, didn't seem to notice the change in her eating habits. This made Tohru believe he was glad she was losing weight, reinforcing her resolve to continue. Her weight became an obsession, consuming her thoughts every waking moment. Despite her effort, Tohru wasn't losing weight as quickly as she wanted. The hunger she felt was painful and constant, but she refused to give in. She sipped water to quell the pangs, but it wasn't enough. Her lips became chapped, and she was constantly shivering and shaking from the cold that seemed to seep into her bones. One evening, Kyo came home to find Tohru sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and drawn. He frowned, noticing the drastic change in her appearance. "Tohru, are you feeling okay? You look really pale." Tohru forced a smile, though it didn't really reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Kyo. Just a little tired." Kyo sat down beside her, his concern evident. "Are you sure? You've been acting different lately. If something's bothering you, you can tell me." Tohru shook her head, guilt gnawing at her. She didn't want to worry him, especially when he was so busy. "It's really okay, Kyo. I'm just tired, that's all." He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. He kissed her forehead gently. "All right, but promise me you'll take care of yourself?" "I promise," she whispered, though her resolve to continue her unhealthy habits remained unbroken. As the days dragged on, the hunger became unbearable. Tohru's body ached, and the constant cold made her shiver uncontrollably. She felt weak and lightheaded, but it still wasn't enough. She needed to lose more weight. Tohru's friends began to notice the change in her. Arisa and Saki exchanged worried glances every time they saw her. They tried to gently probe if something was wrong, but Tohru brushed off their concerns with her usual cheerful demeanor. "I'm just a little stressed, that's all," she would say, avoiding their eyes. One afternoon, while Kyo was at the dojo and Tohru was alone at home, she found herself in front of the full-length mirror again. She lifted her shirt, revealing her ribs jutting out slightly, her skin pale and almost translucent. She touched her stomach, feeling the bones beneath her finger, and a sense of despair washed over her. Why wasn't it enough? Why couldn't she lose more weight? Tohru's meals became smaller and smaller, often just a few bites of fruit or a handful of nuts. The hunger was relentless, a constant gnawing pain that she tried to ignore. Her energy levels plummeted, and she found it hard to get through the day. Tasks that were once easy became insurmountable challenges. Even simple chores left her exhausted and lightheaded. Kyo noticed the changes, but was so wrapped up in his work at the dojo that he didn't put the pieces together. He thought Tohru was just stressed, or maybe coming down with something. He would ask if she was okay, and she would always assure him she was fine, putting on a brave face. One evening, after another meager dinner, Tohru found herself staring into the bathroom mirror, her reflection gaunt and hollow. She gripped the edge of the sink, her mind racing with desperation. The hunger was overwhelming, and she knew she couldn't keep this up forever. Her eyes fell on the toilet, and a dark thought crossed her mind. Maybe, she thought, if I make myself sick, I can erase the food I eat and lose the weight I want. The idea horrified her, but the desperation to shed the pounds was stronger. She felt trapped, unable to see a way out of this vicious cycle she had created herself. As she stood there, trembling and torn, she realized how deep she had sunk into the darkness of her own mind. Her mind drifted to memories of her mother, who had always encouraged her to eat well and stay healthy. She remembered the warmth of her mother's hugs and the comfort of her words. Tohru felt a pang of guilt, knowing her mother would be heartbroken to see her like this. Yet the desire to be thin, to not feel judged by others, overpowered her better judgment. The days became a blur of hunger, fatigue, and obsessive thoughts about her weight. Tohru's clothes hung loosely on her frame, and the sight of herself in the mirror only fueled her determination to lose more weight. Her skin lost its healthy glow, and dark circles formed under her eyes. She became a shadow of her former self, a prisoner to her own mind. Arisa and Saki's concern grew with each passing day. They noticed a drastic change in Tohru's appearance and behavior. One day they cornered her after work, refusing to let her brush them off again. "Tohru, this has gone on long enough," Arisa said firmly, her eyes filled with worry. "We're your friends. We can see that you're not okay. You need help." Tohru felt tears well up in her eyes, but she forced a smile. "I'm fine, really, Arisa. It's just been a tough few weeks." Saki stepped forward, her voice gentle but unwavering. "We love you, Tohru. Please let us help you. This isn't something you have to go through alone." Tohru's facade began to crumble. She wanted to confide in them and tell them about the constant hunger, the obsession with her weight, the dark thoughts, but the fear of judgment and desire to appear strong kept her silent. That night, after another meal she barely touched, Tohru found herself in front of the bathroom mirror once again. The hunger gnawed at her inside, and she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She knew she couldn't keep this up much longer. Her body was screaming for nourishment, but her mind refused to listen. As she stood there trembling and weak, she contemplated the unthinkable once more. The thought terrified her, but she felt trapped in a cycle she couldn't break. She needed help, but she didn't know how to ask for it. Tears streamed down her face as she realized how far she had fallen, and she wondered if she would ever be able to climb back out. Puppet Strings, Chapter 3. One morning, Kyo kissed Tohru goodbye and headed to work, as he always did. His touch lingered on her cheek, and his eyes held a hint of concern, but he said nothing. Tohru smiled and waved him off, watching as he disappeared down the street. As soon as he was gone, her smile faded, replaced by the gnawing anxiety that had become a constant companion. Tohru tried to distract herself by cleaning up the dishes and doing chores around the house. She scrubbed the counters, swept the floors, and even reorganized the pantry. She folded laundry with meticulous care, each fold precise and deliberate. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, the thought of making herself sick loomed over her, an insistent whisper she couldn't ignore. The idea felt like it was calling her, a dark temptation she didn't know how to resist. She moved from one task to another, but the compulsion grew stronger with each passing minute. She wiped down the kitchen table, straightened the cushions on the couch, and dusted every surface she could find. Eventually, she ran out of things to do, and with no distractions left, she felt herself being drawn to the bathroom. With trembling steps, Tohru walked to the bathroom and shut the door behind her. She stood in front of the toilet, staring down at the water in the bowl. Her reflection wavered on the surface, distorted and pale. She felt a mix of fear and desperation, a battle raging inside her mind. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the sink. After what felt like an eternity, she got down on her knees. Tears filled her eyes as she hesitated, but the urge was too strong to fight. With a shaky breath, she leaned over and forced herself to throw up. The act was painful, and it left her feeling weak and dizzy, but a twisted sense of relief washed over her when it was done. Tohru sat back, panting and shaking, but she couldn't shake the grim satisfaction that came with erasing the meal she had consumed. She knew it was wrong, but the sight of her reflection in the mirror, slightly thinner, gave her a sense of accomplishment. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, staring at the reflection with hollow eyes. From that moment on, making herself throw up became an obsession. After every meal, she would excuse herself to the bathroom and purge the food from her body. It became a ritual, a dark secret she carried alone. The numbers on the scale began to drop, and for a brief moment, she felt victorious. But the cost was high. Her energy levels plummeted, and she became even more gaunt and fragile. Her friends and family grew increasingly concerned, but Tohru was adept at hiding the truth. She assured everyone she was fine, even as she felt herself falling deeper into a dark rabbit hole. Arisa and Saki noticed the changes first. They watched as Tohru's once vibrant personality became overshadowed by a quiet, haunting sadness. Arisa tried to comfort her, her voice filled with concern. "Tohru, you've been acting really strange lately. Are you sure everything's okay?" Tohru forced a smile, her eyes avoiding Arisa's. "I'm fine, really. It's just a bit stressed. You know how it is." Saki's gaze was more penetrating, her intuition picking up on the turmoil within Tohru. "We're here for you, Tohru. Whatever you're going through, you don't have to do it alone." Tohru's heart ached at their concern, but the compulsion to lose weight was stronger. She thanked them for their support, but she couldn't bring herself to share the darkness consuming her. One night after dinner, Tohru felt a familiar compulsion gnawing at her. They had shared a quiet meal together. Kyo's eyes filled with worry as he watched her pick at her food. She had managed to eat just enough to placate him, but now the urge to purge was overwhelming. "I'll be right back," she said softly, excusing herself from the table. Kyo nodded, his concern evident but unspoken. "Take your time," he said gently. Tohru walked to the bathroom, her heart pounding in her chest. She closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, trying to gather her strength. The mirror reflected her gaunt face, her hollow eyes. She knew she was losing herself, but the sight of the numbers on the scale going down was a siren song she couldn't resist. She got down on her knees once again, staring at the water in the toilet bowl. The act had become almost automatic, a dark ritual she couldn't escape. With a deep breath, she leaned over and forced herself to throw up, erasing the dinner she had shared with Kyo. When it was over, Tohru sat back, tears streaming down her face. She felt a mix of relief and despair, a hollow victory that left her feeling more lost than ever. She knew she was trapped in a cycle she couldn't break. She didn't know how to ask for help. The darkness had consumed her, and she felt powerless to escape its grip. As she sat there alone in the bathroom, Tohru realized that she was in over her head. The weight on her shoulders was too much to bear, and the path she was on was leading her to a place she might not return from. The numbers on the scale might go down, but the cost was her very soul. The days turned into weeks, and Tohru's condition worsened. She became increasingly frail, her body a mere shadow of its former self. Her skin was pale and lifeless, her eyes dull and sunken. She could hardly find the strength to get out of the bed some days, but the compulsion to lose weight drove her forward. Kyo grew more concerned with each passing day. He noticed the way Tohru's clothes hung loosely on her frame, the way her energy seemed to drain away. He tried to talk to her, to get her to open up, but Tohru always brushed him off with a weak smile and a reassurance that she was fine. One evening, after a particularly rough day at the dojo, Kyo came home to find Tohru sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a plate of food. His heart ached at the sight of her, so fragile and lost. "Tohru," he said softly, sitting down beside her, "you need to eat. You're not taking care of yourself." Tohru looked up at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I'm trying, Kyo. I really am." Kyo reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I know you are, but you're not alone in this. Please, let me help you." Tohru squeezed his hand, her resolve wavering. She wanted to confide in him, tell him about the darkness that had consumed her, but the fear of judgment and the compulsion to lose weight held her back. She wanted to tell him about the puppet strings that controlled her, and the voice of the puppet master rang in her head. "Just give me some time," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Puppet Strings, Chapter 4. Months passed, and Kyo became increasingly aware of the changes in Tohru's behavior. She seemed perpetually anxious, her fingers constantly fidgeting with the hem of her shirt or the strands of her hair. Her once radiant smile was now a rare sight, replaced by a haunted, distracted expression. Conversations with her became strained. She dodged questions and avoided eye contact, often making excuses to leave the room. Kyo's concern deepened as he noticed Tohru spending an inordinate amount of time in the bathroom. She would slip away quietly after meals and late at night. He would hear her rush into the bathroom. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One night, as he lay in bed, he listened to her slip out and pad softly to the bathroom. The anxiety that had been gnawing at him became unbearable. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Preparing himself, Kyo decided to follow her. He approached the bathroom door. The sound of violent retching reached his ears. His heart pounded as he hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door, his concern outweighing any reservation about privacy. Tohru was caught off guard, kneeling by the toilet, her frail body shaking. Her eyes, wide with surprise, were sunken and surrounded by dark circles. Her skin, once glowing with life, was now pale and almost translucent. The sight took Kyo's breath away. His beloved wife looked so sickly, so frail. It broke his heart. "Tohru," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Tohru stammered, her words tumbling out in a panic rush. "Kyo, I didn't want you to see. I'm sorry, But Kyo didn't need her to explain right now. He moved closer, his movements gentle yet determined. Silently, he sat down beside her and pulled her into his arms. Tohru resisted for a moment, her body stiff with tension, but then she collapsed against him, her sobs shaking her entire frame. "Please," he said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of pain and love. "Tell me what's going on." Tohru clung to him, her tears soaking his shirt. I don't know how it started. That day at the dojo, that woman, she said I gained weight, and then I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to eat less, but it wasn't enough. I started making myself sick. I wanted to stop, but I didn't know how. It became everything I could think about." Kyo's heart shattered at her words. He had been so caught up in his own world, he hadn't noticed the depth of her struggle. Guilt and sorrow washed over him, but he knew he had to be strong for her. "Tohru," he whispered, holding her tightly. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. But you don't have to go through this alone anymore. I'm here now, and we're going to get through this together. I'm going to help you get better." Tohru's sobs gradually subsided as she felt the warmth and safety of Kyo's embrace. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen, but filled with a desperate kind of gratitude. "Thank you, Kyo," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Kyo gently brushed her tears away, his eyes filled with determination. "You don't have to find out, Tohru. We're going to fight this together, one step at a time, and I promise I'll be with you every step of the way." The bathroom, once a place of despair and secrecy, now became a space of vulnerability and newfound resolve. In Kyo's arms, Tohru found the strength to begin her journey towards healing. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but with Kyo by her side, she knew she could face it. The next morning, Kyo made an appointment with their family doctor. Tohru hesitated, anxiety bubbling up inside her, but Kyo's unwavering support gave her the courage to follow through. Puppet Strings, Chapter 5. Much to Tohru's dismay, Kyo insisted on taking her to Hatoru's office. As they arrived, Kyo's usually calm demeanor was replaced by visible anxiety, while Tohru appeared frail and uncharacteristically thin. Hatoru finished up with another patient, noticed them immediately, his eyes widening with concern at the sight of Kyo's frantic expression and Tohru's gaunt appearance. "I'm just finishing up. Please have a seat. I'll see you in a few moments," Hatoru said, his tone calm, but his eyes betraying his worry. In the waiting room, Tohru turned to Kyo, her voice trembling. "Kyo, please, let's just go home. I don't want to do this." Kyo knelt in front of her, looking deeply into her eyes. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair out of her face and tucked it behind her ear. "Tohru, I need you to get better. This is how we start," he said softly but firmly, his voice filled with love and determination. Tohru's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, swallowing her fears as she clung to Kyo's hand. Moments later, Hatoru appeared in the door and ushered them into his office. Tohru's heart pounded in her chest as she followed him, her mind racing with anxiety. Hatoru conducted a thorough checkup, his movements precise and gentle. Kyo, his voice steady but his eyes filled with anguish, explained everything that had been happening over the past few weeks. Tohru remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Hatoru listened intently, his expression growing graver by the moment. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting Kyo's before shifting to Tohru. "Tohru," he began gently, "it sounds like you're struggling with an eating disorder. It's treatable, but it's going to be a long and hard journey." Tohru's eyes flickered with fear and shame. She could barely bring herself to meet Hatoru's gaze. "What does recovery look like?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Hatoru's voice was compassionate yet firm as he explained, "Recovery will involve regular therapy sessions, nutritional counseling, and a lot of support from those around you. It's crucial that you eat regularly and follow a balanced diet. There will be good days and bad days, but the important thing is that you want to get better." Tohru nodded slowly, her voice shaking as she said, I want to get better." On the way home, Tohru was unusually quiet. Kyo kept glancing at her, worry etched on his face, but he didn't push her to talk. He knew she needed time to process everything. When they arrived home, Tohru went straight upstairs and crawled into bed. Kyo watched her with a heavy heart, feeling a mixture of hope and helplessness. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her curl up under the blankets, looking so small and vulnerable. Kyo made a silent promise to himself as he stood there, his resolve hardening. He was going to get her better, no matter how long it took, no matter how difficult the journey would be. He was determined to see Tohru healthy and happy again. Over the next few days, Kyo immersed himself in learning everything he could about eating disorders. He read books, consulted with Hattori, and even joined an online support group for families dealing with similar issues. He wanted to be as prepared as possible to support Tohru in her recovery. At home, he started cooking meals that were not only nutritious, but also comforting. He made a point to eat with Tohru, engage her in light, easy conversation to distract her from the anxiety that often accompanied eating. He monitored her closely, always ready to step in with encouragement when he noticed her struggling. Despite his efforts, there were still moments when Tohru found herself overwhelmed. She would sit at the table, her eyes filled with tears, unable to take a bite. During those times, Kyo would take her hand, his voice gentle but firm. "It's okay, Tohru. One bite at a time. We're in this together." Puppet Strings, Chapter 6. Over the next few days, Kyo's focus was unwavering. He was meticulous about keeping Tohru on her recovery plan, preparing meals that were not only nutritious, but also carefully tailored to meet her needs. Despite his dedication and the care he put into each meal, Tohru found herself battling a relentless inner turmoil. The voices in her head seemed to grow louder with every bite she took, each meal becoming a new battleground. One evening, Kyo made a dinner that he hoped would bring her some comfort. He prepared a well-balanced meal with colorful vegetables, lean proteins, and wholesome grains, each ingredient chosen to nourish both body and soul. As he placed the steaming plate in front of them, he offered Tohru a warm smile, trying to ease her anxiety. Tohru, however, was struggling. She picked at her plate, managing only a few small bites. Each mouthful seemed to bring her more distress. Kyo noticed the tension in her shoulders and the way her eyes fluttered nervously around the room. He tried to engage her in light conversation, offering gentle words of encouragement. But Tohru's responses were subdued, her focus clearly elsewhere. After dinner, they went through their evening routine. Kyo sensed Tohru's growing agitation, but chose to give her some space, hoping that time would help her process her feelings. They climbed into bed, and Kyo soon fell asleep beside her, his breathing steady and calming. Tohru, however, found it impossible to quiet her racing thoughts. As the minutes ticked by, the voices in her head grew louder and more insistent. They screamed at her, attacking her self-worth and fueling her guilt. Every attempt to focus on the soothing presence of Kyo beside her seemed to be in vain. The inner turmoil was consuming, and despite her best effort to push it away, the voices became unbearable. Around 3 a.m., driven by an overpowering compulsion, Tohru slipped out of bed. She moved with a mechanical precision, her actions dedicated by the relentless voices in her mind. She made her way to the bathroom, her steps heavy with dread. Once inside, she stood in front of the toilet, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The toilet seemed to mock her with its emptiness. The voices in her head continued to ceaseless chant, "Erase, erase, erase." They were cruel and insistent, urging her to undo the small progress she had made. Despite knowing she shouldn't, her body responded to the command, and she found herself succumbing to the urge to throw up the very little she had eaten. The violent, harsh sounds of retching echoed through the house. Kyo, disturbed by the unsettling noises, woke abruptly. His heart sank as he realized the distressing sounds were coming from the bathroom. With a sense of urgency, he followed the noise, fear gripping him with each step. As he reached the bathroom door, he hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The sight that greeting him was heart-wrenching. Tohru sitting on the floor, her head resting on the rim of the toilet, her body shaking with sobs. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, and her hair was disheveled. Kyo's heart ached as he saw her in such a vulnerable state. Without a word, he knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her with a tenderness that spoke volumes. Tohru clung to him, her sobs coming in ragged, desperate grasps. "I'm so sorry," she mumbled between her cries. "I can't make it stop. The voice, it won't stop." Kyo held her close, his eyes brimming with tears as he tried to offer comfort. The helplessness he felt was overwhelming. He wished he could take away her pain, erase the torment she was enduring. He gently stroked her hair, his touch soothing despite the gravity of the situation. "What does the voice say to you, Tohru?" he asked softly, his voice trembling with concern. "What does it tell you?" Tohru's sobs intensified at the question, her face buried against his shoulder. "It tells me I am worthless," she whispered, her voice choked with anguish. "It says I need to erase everything, and that I'm not good enough, that I have to make it right." Kyo's heart broke as he listened to her words. He pulled her tighter into his embrace, feeling the weight of her pain. The realization of how deeply she was suffering hit him with a profound sadness. He wanted to take away her torment, to silence the cruel voices that plagued her, but he knew this was a battle she needed to fight with his support. "Tohru," he said softly, his voice filled with empathy and resolve. "I'm not mad at you. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." Tohru continued to cry, her words barely coherent as she repeated the voice. "I can't make it stop." Kyo's heart ached with each sob, and he felt an overwhelming urge to protect her from the pain. He stayed with her, holding her close as the minutes ticked by. His presence was a steady reminder that she was not alone, that he was committed to helping her through this dark time. As Tohru's sobs began to subside, Kyo helped her to her feet. He guided her gently back to bed, his actions tender and reassuring. He stayed with her, offering a comforting silence that spoke volumes. The first light of dawn began to filter through the window, casting a soft glow over the room. Kyo vowed to continue his unwavering support, determined to stand by her through every challenge they faced. Puppet Strings, Chapter 7. A month had passed since Tohru and Kyo's last visit to Hattori's office. The days had been a grueling test of perseverance and commitment, with each moment of progress shadowed by an ongoing struggle against Tohru's inner demons. Despite the efforts and support from Kyo, recovery was a slow and often painful process. Every day brought new challenges, and every meal was a reminder of the internal battle Tohru faced. Today they found themselves back in Hattori's office for a follow-up appointment. Kyo drove them there with a mix of hope and apprehension, his eyes frequently darting to Tohru as he tried to gauge her mood. Tohru, sitting beside him, looked both determined and weary. Her attempts to maintain a semblance of normalcy were evident, but Kyo could sense the underlying strain in her demeanor. Upon arrival, they were greeted by Hattori, who ushered them into an examination room. Hattori's demeanor was warm and reassuring as began the checkup. He was methodical, but there was a glimmer of optimism in his eyes that Kyo noticed. The examination seemed to take longer than usual, and Kyo watched as Tohru's nervousness grew. She fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape from her anxiety. Finally, Hattori concluded his assessment and looked at them with a bright smile. "I have some good news," he said cheerfully. "Tohru has gained a few pounds since her last visit. This is a positive development and an important step forward in her recovery." The words were meant to be uplifting, but Tohru felt like they were a crushing blow. The victory she should have celebrated felt hollow and even punitive. Her stomach knotted as she tried to process the news. Gaining weight was the goal, but it had become a symbol of her failure, and the reality of it hit her with a force she hadn't anticipated. She forced a smile and nodded, trying to mask her distress. "That's good to hear," she said, her voice faint and lacking conviction. On their way home, Kyo noticed that Tohru was unusually quiet. Her usual chatter was replaced by a heavy silence that made Kyo's concern grow. "Tohru," he said gently, glancing at her as he drove, "you seem really quiet today. Something wrong?" Tohru shook her head, her gaze fixed on the window. "I'm fine, Kyo. Just a little tired, that's all," she replied, her tone flat and unconvincing. Kyo was not convinced, but he chose to let it go for the moment, hoping she would open up when she was ready. Once they got home, Tohru made a beeline for their bedroom, her shoulders slumped in resignation. Kyo, however, was determined to address the issue. He intercepted her at the door, gently but firmly guiding her to the dining table. "I know you're struggling," he said, his voice filled with a mix of firmness and compassion, "but we need to stick to the plan." Tohru sat at the table, her eyes already welling with tears. Kyo placed half a sandwich in front of her, a simple, well-balanced meal, carefully prepared to meet her dietary needs. He could see the resistance in her eyes, and the sandwich, though ordinary, seemed to carry the weight of her internal struggle. "I know it's hard," Kyo said softly, his eyes pleading, "but I need you to try. I'm here with you, and we'll get through this together." Tohru stared at the sandwich. The sandwich, though seemingly harmless, felt like a symbol of her failure. Her hands shook as she picked it up, her gaze locked on the food. She took a tentative bite, her face contorting with discomfort. As she chewed, her gag reflex kicked in and she began to sob, the effort of eating causing her immense distress. Kyo watched with a heavy heart, feeling helpless as he saw her struggle. Every bite seemed to be a battle, and each sob was a painful reminder of the internal war she was fighting. Kyo wished he could take away her pain, but he knew that wasn't possible. All he could do was be there for her, offering his unwavering support. As Tohru continued to eat, she cried openly, her tears falling onto the plate. The sandwich, once whole, was gradually reduced to a mere remnant of what it had been. Kyo remained by her side, his expression a mixture of sadness and resolve. He understood that this was more than just about eating. It was about comforting her fears and insecurities. When the half of the sandwich was finally gone, Tohru sat in front of him, her eyes resting in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the aftermath of her sobs. Kyo could see how exhausted and defeated she looked, and he knew that this wasn't what she truly wanted. Kyo knelt in front of her, his eyes filled with deep concern and love. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender and soothing. "Tohru," he said softly, his voice quivering with emotion. "Seeing you like this, it hurts me so much. I'm scared for you. It's terrifying to watch someone I love so much hurt themselves." Tohru looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. The raw vulnerability in her gaze broke Kyo's heart. "I'm scared too," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know what scares me exactly. I just feel like I'm living in fear all the time. Every time the number on the scale goes up, I feel like I'm the ugliest person in the world." Kyo's heart ached at her words. The pain and self-loathing she expressed were deeply troubling, and he wished he could make it all go away. He held her gaze, his expression filled with a mixture of determination and love. "Tohru," he said firmly, "you are beautiful. You always have been and always will be. The number on the scale doesn't change that. You are so much more than that number. You are kind, strong, and incredibly loved." Tohru's tears continued to fall, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes, a glimmer of belief at the words Kyo was speaking. Kyo wiped her tears gently with his thumb, his heart swelling with a mix of compassion and resolve. "We're going to get through this," he said softly. "It's going to be tough, but I'm here for you every step of the way. We'll face it together. You don't have to do this alone." Tohru nodded slowly, her breathing uneven as she tried to absorb his words. The road to recovery was still fraught with challenges, but Kyo's unwavering support and his heartfelt declaration of her worth provided a glimmer of hope. As they sat together at the table, Kyo's presence was a reassuring reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was a path forward, a path they would walk together, one step at a time. Puppet Strings, Chapter 8. Tohru, using the last reserve of her energy, busied herself with chores around the house. Each task, while mundane, was a small victory in her ongoing battle. She scrubbed the countertops, dusted the shelves, and tidied up the living room with a sense of quiet determination. The familiar task provided a fleeting sense of control and normalcy amidst the chaos of her recovery. As she was wiping down the kitchen counter, the phone rang, its sudden intrusion slicing through the quiet hum of the house. Tohru's heart skipped a beat. She and Kyo had agreed to focus solely on her recovery, limiting contact with the outside world to avoid unnecessary stress. They had been maintaining a low profile, and the idea of breaking that routine felt unsettling. Yet for some reason, she felt compelled to answer the call. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the receiver. With a deep breath, she picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly. The familiar voice of Yuki greeted her on the other end. "Hello, Tohru? It's Yuki. I'm relieved to finally hear from you. I've been trying to reach both you and Kyo for a couple weeks now. Is everything all right?" Tohru's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this call, and the pressure to respond felt immense. She forced a reassuring tone into her voice. "Hi, Yuki. Yes, everything's fine. We've had some issues with our internet and cell service, but it's been fixed recently." Yuki's response was cautious. "That's good to hear. I was getting worried. I just wanted to check if you and Kyo were still planning to attend the New Year's celebration at the Soma estate. It's coming up soon." The mention of the New Year's celebration struck Tohru like a bolt of lightning. The realization that the event was intimate and overwhelming. Her mind raced with images of the celebration, the grand dining tables, the myriad of dishes, and the expectation of social interaction. The thought of having to face it all, while trying to maintain her recovery, filled her with dread. Her breathing became shallow and her heart began to race uncontrollably. The room seemed to close in on her. Yuki's concern was evident in his voice. "Tohru, are you okay? You sounded stressed. What's wrong?" The panic surged, and Tohru found herself unable to articulate her fears. The anxiety was consuming her, and she felt as if she were slipping further away from reality. She could barely catch her breath, and the pressure in her chest became nearly unbearable. Just then, Kyo walked in from work, his presence immediately noticeable. He saw Tohru clutching the phone, her face pale and her breathing erratic. Without hesitation, he crossed the room, his concern deepening as he took in her state. "Tohru, you need to calm down," he said gently, his voice firm yet soothing. He carefully took the phone from her trembling hand. "Let me handle this." He glanced at the caller ID and recognized Yuki's name. "Yuki, it's not a good time right now. We'll call you back later," Kyo said, trying to sound as composed as possible. Before Yuki could respond or protest, Kyo ended the call. Tohru was already moving towards the bathroom, her anxiety driving her emotions. She stumbled inside and sank to her knees beside the toilet, her body shaking as she fought to regain control. Kyo followed her, his heart heavy with concern. He knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her in a comforting embrace. "It's okay, Tohru," he whispered, his voice soft and reassuring. "I'm here. Just focus on breathing. You're going to be okay." Tohru's sobs and the sound of her distress filled the small bathroom. Kyo held her close, his own emotions a turbulent mix of sadness and helplessness. The sight of her struggling so intently was almost too much for him to bear. He wished he could erase her pain and make everything better. After a few moments, Tohru's breathing began to slow, but the distress was still evident in her eyes. Kyo helped her sit up and leaned against the wall beside her. He looked at her with a mix of love and determination. "What happened?" he asked gently. Tohru's voice was barely more than a whisper. "New Year's, the celebration." Kyo's heart sank and the realization hit him. The New Year's celebration of the Soma state was a high-profile event, filled with social expectations and a significant amount of food. The thought of attending such an event while dealing with her recovery was daunting, and Kyo could understand why the idea had caused her so much distress. Kyo took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "I understand why this is hard for you," he said softly. "The idea of facing that celebration with all the food and the judgmental eyes, it's a lot to handle. I'm feeling overwhelmed by it too. You don't have to go through this alone, Tohru." He paused, looking deeply into her eyes. "We'll face it together. We'll work through it, step by step. We'll make a plan to manage the situation and support each other. I promise you, we'll get through this." Tohru looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. The reassurance in Kyo's words provided a small beacon of hope amidst her turmoil. She nodded slowly, the weight of her anxiety still present, but softened by Kyo's unwavering support. As they sat together in the bathroom, Kyo's presence was a comforting anchor. He continued to hold her close, his touch steady and warm. They knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but Kyo's commitment to supporting Tohru and his promise to navigate the difficulties of New Year's celebration together offered a glimmer of hope. Despite the obstacles they faced, Kyo's dedication to helping Tohru through her recovery and their upcoming challenges remained resolute. Together, they prepared to confront the future, one day at a time. Puppet Strings, Chapter 9. The Grand Soma estate was a kaleidoscope of festivities as Tohru and Kyo arrived for the New Year celebration. The estate was adorned with shimmering decorations, vibrant lights, and an array of delicacies that filled the air with tempting aromas. The sounds of laughter and chatter blended with the clinking of glasses, creating an atmosphere that was both enchanting and overwhelming for Tohru. Tohru walked beside Kyo, her eyes scanning the room, but failing to take in the beauty of the surroundings. Instead, she felt an oppressive weight pressing down on her shoulders, a sensation that grew heavier with each step. The whispers and glances from the assembled family members pierced through her like icy daggers. The once comforting embrace of the Soma family now felt like a relentless spotlight, exposing her vulnerabilities. She could feel the eyes of everyone on her, and the sensation was unbearable. It was as though every pair of eyes was magnifying her insecurities, turning her into an exhibit of her struggle. The festive atmosphere seemed to mock her internal turmoil, and the contrast between her current state and the celebratory environment was jarring. The more she tried to hold herself together, the more she felt like a marionette, her strings pulled by forces beyond her control. The voices in her head, which had been a persistent presence, grew louder in the chaos of the celebration. They taunted her, reminding her of her perceived failures and weaknesses. The self-critical thoughts surged like a storm, and Tohru's breaths came in shallow panic bursts. Each whispered judgment seemed to fuel her anxiety, making her feel even more isolated. Suddenly, Tohru's legs felt weak, and she came to a halt, her hand gripping her stomach as if to steady herself. Kyo, noticing her sudden stop, turned with concern etched deeply into his face. He saw the pale shade of green on her face and the wide, terrified eyes. "Tohru, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with worry. "I feel like I'm going to throw up," Tohru managed to choke out. her voice trembling uncontrollably. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, and Kyo's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. Without hesitation, he guided her to a nearby bench, gently helping her sit down. "Just breathe, Tohru," Kyo said softly, placing a comforting hand on her back. "I'm here. You're going to be okay." Tohru tried to focus her breathing, but the anxiety was relentless. Kyo, sensing her struggle, kissed her forehead with a tender gesture of reassurance. "I'm going to get you some water," he said. "Stay here and try to relax." As Kyo walked away, Tohru's anxiety didn't ease. Her thoughts raced, her heart pounded, and the sensation of being observed made her feel even more trapped. Meanwhile, Yuki and Shigure noticed Kyo's concerned demeanor and approached him as he made his way to the refreshment table. "Kyo, what's going on with Tohru?" Yuki asked, his voice tinged with concern. "She looks incredibly thin. Is she sick?" Kyo's frustration and worry were evident in his expression. He shook his head, trying to keep his composure. "She's going through something right now," he said, his voice tight. "She wants to keep it private." Shigure, always one to push boundaries, leaned in with curiosity. "But she looks so unwell. Is there anything we can do to help?" Kyo's patience wore thin. "Just support her," he said sharply. "Don't make her feel like she's on display." Yuki's eyes softened with empathy. "We'll respect her privacy and offer support. Let us know if there's anything specific we can do." Kyo nodded gratefully and headed back to where Tohru was sitting. As he approached, he saw her attempting to engage in light conversation with Momiji, though her distress was palpable. Kyo took her hand and gently led her to the dining table, where the feast was laid out. Tohru's anxiety surged again as she faced the array of dishes before her. The proportions were far larger than she was used to, and the variety of food was overwhelming. The sight of the abundant spread triggered a torrent of negative thoughts, making her feel like she was suffocating under the pressure. The voices in her head grew louder, urging her to avoid the food and retreat from the situation. Kyo noticed her increasing unease and squeezed her hand gently. He leaned in, his voice a soft, steady anchor amidst the chaos. "You're doing great," he whispered. "Just take it one bite at a time. I'm right here with you." Tohru hesitated, her hands trembling as she picked up her chopsticks. The first bite felt like an enormous challenge, each chew accompanied by a battle against her inner turmoil. Her arms felt as they were weighed down, and the food in her mouth seemed to expand, making her gag repeatedly. Tears streamed down her face as she fought to keep her composure. Kyo's encouragement was constant, his voice a reassuring presence in the midst of her struggle. "You're doing so well," he said, his tone soothing. "Just keep going at your own pace." Momiji, who had been sitting across from Tohru, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay, Tohru?" he asked, with genuine concern. Through her tears, Tohru nodded, though her distress was evident. Kyo looked at Momiji and gave a brief, understanding nod. "She's okay. Just give her some time and space," he said, trying to manage the situation while respecting Tohru's need for privacy. The other guests, sensing the gravity of the moment, returned to their own conversations, offering Tohru the space she needed. Tohru managed to eat about a quarter of her plate before she set down her chopsticks, her body and mind exhausted from the effort. Kyo, moved by her struggle and perseverance, pulled her into a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The raw intensity of the moment made Tohru sob even harder, her tears mingling with Kyo's supportive presence. The other guests watched the mixture of confusion and sympathy, their understanding deepening as they witnessed the profound connection between Kyo and Tohru. Realizing that the eyes of the Soma family were upon them, Kyo knew that Tohru needed a more private space. He gently guided her out of the dining area into a quiet hallway. As Tohru sank to her knees, overwhelmed by her emotions, Kyo sat beside her, holding her close and whispering words of reassurance. In the solitude of the hallway, Kyo's presence was a comforting balm to Tohru's anguish. He wrapped his arms around her, offering a steady and unwavering source of support. The former Zodiac members, observing from a distance, could sense the depth of the emotional struggle and the profound bond between the couple, even if they did not fully comprehend the situation. Tohru's sobs gradually subsided, and she felt the warmth and love from Kyo. The hallway, though filled with the distant sounds of the celebration, became a sanctuary where she could release her pain and find a solace in Kyo's embrace. As they remained there, Kyo's determination to support her and help her through this challenging time was evident, reflecting the strength of their love and commitment to each other. Puppet Strings, Chapter 10. The evening at the Soma estate was alive with the joyous clamor of Akito's birthday. The house was beautifully decorated with strings of paper lanterns and shimmering streamers that caught the warm glow of the lights. The smell of delicious food filled the air, mingling with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the upbeat melodies of traditional music. Tohru and Kyo arrived together, their interests marked by a mixture of anticipation and nerves. Tohru had made noticeable progress, her steps more confident than before, though she still carried the weight of her struggle. Kyo, ever supportive, walked proudly beside her, his heart swelling with admiration of her resilience. The night unfolded with a series of engaging conversation and cheerful interactions. Family members, old friends, and new acquaintances gathered around, exchanging pleasantries and sharing in the festive spirit. Tohru mingled with the crowd, her presence both reassuring and poignant. The family members welcomed her warmly, but the atmosphere was not without its challenges. As the evening progressed, Kyo noticed a subtle shift in Tohru's demeanor. She seemed to be participating in conversations, but appeared somewhat distant, her laughter not quite reaching her eyes, her gaze often drifted around the room, her smile faltering occasionally. Kyo's concern grew as he watched her. At one point, Tohru excused herself from the conversation and moved to the edge of the room. Kyo, worried about her well-being, approached her. "Hey, Tohru," he said softly, "do you want to step outside for a bit? Get some fresh air?" Tohru looked up at him, her expression a mix of confusion and apprehension. After a brief moment, she nodded. "Sure, Kyo." They stepped out into the crisp evening air, which was a refreshing contrast to the warmth of the indoors. The garden was quiet, illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns hanging from the trees. Kyo led her to a secluded bench, and they sat together in silence for a moment, taking in the peaceful surroundings. Kyo turned to her, his voice gentle. "So, how are you feeling? Is everything okay?" Tohru hesitated, her eyes downcast. She seemed to be searching for the right words, but then she closed her mouth and shook her head. Kyo reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You can talk to me about anything, you know." Tohru took a deep breath, her gaze lifting to meet his. With a determined look, she stood up and headed back towards the house. Kyo followed her, his concern growing. They re-entered the bustling party, and Kyo was puzzled when Tohru led them to the snack table. He watched as she surveyed the array of treats, her expression a mixture of anxiety and resolve. "What's going on?" Kyo asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Do you want something?" Tohru glanced at him and then nodded. "Yes, I'd like a small bag of chips." Kyo's face brightened with pride. "Of course!" He grabbed a small bag of chips and handed it to her, his heart swelling with a mix of hope and anxiety. They returned to the main area where the family continued their conversation. Kyo kept a careful eye on Tohru, watching her every move. He could see her trembling slightly as she held the bag of chips. Her hands shook as she opened the bag, and Kyo could sense the immense internal struggle she was facing. Tohru took a chip out and held it in her trembling hands. She stared at it as if it were a symbol of all her fears and doubts. Her internal battle was visible, and Kyo's heart ached seeing her so distressed. Yet, she mustered the courage to place the chip in her mouth. Her expression was one of intense concentration and vulnerability as she chewed and swallowed. Kyo's eyes never left her. He was so emotionally invested in the moment that he didn't notice Haru calling his name from across the room. When Kyo finally looked up, he saw Haru's concerned face. "What's wrong, Kyo?" Haru asked, his tone laced with worry. Kyo managed to smile, though his eyes were misty with emotion. "I'm fine, Haru. Just really happy." Tohru finished the bag of chips and set it on the floor. She excused herself to get some water, her movements weary but purposeful. Kyo, driven by curiosity and concern, picked up the empty chip bag. His eyes widened as he saw that the bag was completely empty. The sight of it, representing a significant step in Tohru's recovery, brought tears to his eyes. As he stood there, lost in his thoughts, Tohru returned with a glass of water. She noticed the tears in Kyo's eyes and immediately felt a pang of worry. "Kyo, are you okay?" Without hesitation, Kyo pulled her into a tight embrace. The intensity of his hug spoke volumes, conveying his pride, relief, and love. Tohru's glass of water slipped from her hand and fell to the floor, but neither of them cared. Kyo's voice was choked with emotion as he whispered, "I'm so proud of you. You're doing amazing." Tohru felt herself wavering as she heard his heartfelt words. The sheer depth of his pride and love was overwhelming, and she was moved to tears. In that moment, she resolved to continue fighting for her recovery, driven by the knowledge that Kyo's support was unwavering and that he believed in her. The Soma family, watching from a distance, sensed the importance of the moment. They saw Kyo and Tohru's profound connection and the significance of their exchange. While they didn't fully understand the details, they could tell that this was a pivotal moment for the couple. As Kyo held Tohru, their embrace was a testament to their shared strength and commitment. The surrounding noise of the party seemed distant, overshadowed by the powerful bond between them. Kyo whispered reassurance and loving words, his focus solely on comforting Tohru. The night continued around them, but for Kyo and Tohru, it was a moment of triumph and tenderness. The family, though unsure of the specifics, respected the significance of the encounter. They returned to their festivities with a quiet understanding, leaving Kyo and Tohru alone in their intimate moment. Puppet Strings, Chapter 11. The day of Kisa's birthday party had arrived, and despite the heaviness that had settled over her in the past few days, Tohru was determined to attend. Recovery had its ups and downs, and today was one of those challenging days where the weight of her insecurities felt almost unbearable. The harsh whispers of self-doubt and the relentless clamor of her inner critic made every step feel like she was wading through molasses. Kyo, ever observant of her moods, had been prepared for the possibility that Tohru might decline the invitation. When he received the message about Kisa's celebration, he hoped for the best, but mentally braced himself for refusal. However, Tohru's resolve to be there for Kisa, to show her support and celebrate her special day, was unyielding. The party was held at the Soma estate, decorated with vibrant streamers and fairy lights that danced softly in the evening breeze. The scent of delicious food wafted through the air, mingling with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Despite her internal struggle, Tohru found solace in the festive atmosphere and in the company of the Soma family. Kyo had noticed the effort she was putting in, and her presence at the party made him feel a swell of pride. As the evening progressed, Tohru watched the interactions around her. She saw Kyo relaxing and enjoying himself, a testament to the progress she had made in her recovery. His ease was comforting, but it also reminded her of the challenges she still faced. Feeling a need to challenge herself, Tohru gravitated towards the dessert table. The birthday cake was a masterpiece, layered with rich chocolate and topped with a cascade of colorful sprinkles. She decided to take a small piece, wanting to test her limits and savor a moment of indulgence. Tohru picked up the slice with trembling hands and took a bite. The sweetness of the cake was a rare pleasure, a fleeting moment of joy in her journey. She closed her eyes, savoring the flavor, and for a brief moment the cacophony of self-criticism quieted. But her small victory was soon overshadowed by an unwelcome presence. The maid, who had been observing from the corner of the room, scoffed at her with a look of disdain. Tohru's smile faltered as the maid approached her with a dismissive air. "You really shouldn't be eating that," the maid said coldly. "You don't need any extra weight." The sting of the maid's words was immediate and devastating. It felt like a sharp jab to her already fragile sense of self. The weight of the comet tightened the grip of her inner demons, and the pleasure she had briefly felt was replaced by a surge of self-loathing. The cake, which had been a symbol of her small victory, now seemed like a betrayal. Feeling overwhelmed and on the verge of tears, Tohru excused herself from the party. She walked outside, her heart heavy with the impact of the maid's comment. She found a secluded bench and sat down, the piece of cake lying forgotten in her lap. The joy she had felt earlier was placed by a deep, hollow emptiness. Kyo had been enjoying the party, but his attention shifted when he noticed Tohru's absence. He scanned the room and soon spotted her sitting alone on the bench outside. His heart sank as he approached her, taking the sight of her slumped posture and the cake sitting forlornly on her lap. "Hey, Tohru," he said gently as he sat beside her. "You got cake. How does it taste? I was thinking about getting a piece." His attempt at light conversation was meant to be comforting, but as he noticed the tears streaming down her face, his concern deepened. "Tohru, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice edged with worry. Tohru didn't respond verbally. Instead, she slid the cake off her lap and with a choked sob threw herself in Kyo's arms. The raw vulnerability of the moment was palpable, and Kyo felt his heart break at the sight of her distress. He held her close, offering what comfort he could as she sobbed uncontrollably. He could feel her tears soaking into his shirt, and the sound of her muffled cries was a piercing reminder of her suffering. After a few minutes, her sobs began to quiet, and she started to regain some composure. Kyo gently stroked her back, his own heart aching with every tremor of her body. "Tohru, can you tell me what happened?" he asked softly. Through her tears, she managed to speak. "The maid, she said I shouldn't be eating the cake, that I don't need to gain any extra weight. It just made me feel so awful." Kyo's face flushed with anger as he absorbed her words. The thought of someone being so cruel, especially to someone he cared about deeply, was infuriating. "Stay here," he said firmly, his voice steady despite his rage. "Finish your piece of cake. What that woman said isn't true. You deserve to enjoy it, and you're doing so well." With that, Kyo stood up and walked back towards the party, his anger barely contained. The other guests noticed the intensity of his demeanor as he made his way through the room. Cosmo was the first to approach him, a look of concern on his face. "Kyo, what's wrong?" Cosmo asked, his voice filled with genuine worry. Kyo, barely containing his frustration, ignored Cosmo's question and headed straight for Akito, who was engaged in conversation with Shigure. The atmosphere around them seemed to grow tense, and Kyo approached, his anger palpable. "Akito," his voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "I need to talk to you." Akito turned to face him, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she took in his fiery demeanor. "What's the matter?" she asked, her voice calm but inquisitive. Kyo took a deep breath, his anger barely restrained. "Your maid. She told Tohru that she shouldn't be eating cake, that she doesn't need any extra weight. Control your damn maids. This kind of comment destroys everything she's worked for." The room fell silent as Kyo's words hung in the air. The guests exchanged confused glances, feeling the weight of his emotions, but not fully understanding the context. Akito, however, grasped the gravity of the situation. Her face grew stern as she processed Kyo's words. Without a word, Akito stood up and walked out of the room, her mind racing with the urgency of the situation. She found Tohru sitting on the bench outside, her expression a mixture of sorrow and resignation. Kneeling in front of her, Akito's voice was soft but firm. "Tohru," Akito said gently, "what that maid said is completely wrong. You are beautiful just the way you are. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Tohru looked up at Akito, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Akito's words were a comforting balm to her wounded spirit. Before Tohru could respond, Akito stood up and turned towards the maid, her anger evident in her stride. Kyo returned to Tohru, finding her sitting on the bench with a more composed demeanor. He gently encouraged her to pick up the piece of cake and take another bite. "You're doing great, Tohru," he said softly. "Just keep taking things one step at a time." Tohru hesitated for a moment, but then reached for the cake again. With trembling hands, she took another bite. The act was a small but significant victory, a testament to her resilience and the support she received. Kyo watched her with pride, his heart swelling with admiration for her courage. As Tohru continued to eat, her tears began to dry, replaced by a sense of quiet resolve. Kyo held her hand, offering support. The Soma family, observing from a distance, could sense the importance of the moment, respected the private nature of the struggle unfolding before them. Tohru's piece of cake was now nearly finished, each bite representing a small triumph over her fears. Kyo's unwavering support and Akito's unexpected kindness had made a significant impact. For the first time in a while, Tohru felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of progress in her ongoing journey of recovery. Puppet Strings, Chapter 12. A year and a half had passed since the intense night of emotional upheaval, and Tohru had made remarkable strides in her recovery. Each day was still a journey, but she had found a steadier footing, and the voices that once dominated her thoughts were no longer the puppeteers of her life. Now she enjoyed the simple pleasure of existence, finding joy in moments that once seemed out of reach. It was a regular Tuesday morning, and the kitchen was alive with the scent of fresh coffee and sizzling breakfast. Tohru and Kyo stood side by side, their morning routine a comfortable rhythm they had settled into. Kyo chopped vegetables while Tohru whisked eggs, their movement in sync as they worked together. Kyo glanced over at Tohru, noticing that her usual cheerfulness seemed somewhat subdued that morning. He furrowed his brow with concern. "Hey, Tohru," he said, his voice gentle. "Is everything okay? Been quiet this morning." Tohru looked up from her task, her eyes meeting his with contemplative glaze. She seemed to hesitate for a moment before a soft smile appeared on her lips. "Actually, Kyo, I was wondering if we could go out to dinner tonight." Kyo's eyes widened in surprise, and a broad grin spread across his face. He dropped what he was doing and reached out to pull her into a spontaneous embrace. With a joyful laugh, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his excitement evident. Tohru's surprised gasp turned into a peal of laughter as Kyo's lips met hers in a quick, affectionate kiss. When they finally parted, Kyo looked up at her with shining eyes. "We can go anywhere you want, Tohru. Any restaurant you choose. Just tell me where." Tohru's smile grew even brighter, but she seemed to have more to say. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice trembling slightly with a mix of nerves and anticipation. "I want to tell the family. I want them to know about everything we've been through." Kyo's expression shifted to one of surprise. He hadn't anticipated that request, but seeing the determination in Tohru's eyes, he realized how important it was to her. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "You know how difficult it can be with everyone's reactions." Tohru nodded, her resolve firm. "Yes, I'm ready. I want them to know, and I want them to see how far we've come." Kyo took a deep breath, considering her request. "Okay," he said, nodding slowly. "How about we invite everyone to dinner tonight? We can tell them then." The hours passed quickly, and before either of them knew it, the time had come for their dinner gathering. Kyo and Tohru had arranged a private dining area at a cozy restaurant, one that was both elegant and intimate. As guests arrived, the warm atmosphere was filled with laughter and conversation, a stark contrast to the serious conversation that was about to unfold. Tohru's heart pounded as she glanced around the room at her family and friends, Yuki, Shigure, Momiji, Kisa, and the others, who were gathered around the table. Each of them had been a part of her journey in their own way, and now they were about to hear the full story. As the evening progressed, Tohru felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Her palms were sweaty and her knees wobbled slightly as she prepared to stand. Sensing her apprehension, Kyo placed a reassuring hand on her back, his touch steady and grounding. "Everyone," Tohru began, her voice quivering as she addressed the room. "Kyo and I have something important to share with you." The room quieted as all eyes turned to her. With Kyo by her side, Tohru took a deep breath and continued. "Over the past year and a half, we faced some difficult times. I've struggled a lot with inner turmoil, with voices that made me feel like I was dancing on strings, controlled and trapped. It was a constant battle, and some days were incredibly hard." Kyo squeezed her hand gently, his gaze filled with unwavering support. "But Tohru has made incredible progress," he added. "We worked through a lot together, and it hasn't been easy. There have been many ups and downs, but we're here today because of her strength and resilience." Tohru nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "It hasn't been a perfect journey, and I still have tough days, but I learned that that's okay to ask for help and to lean on those who care about me. I wanted to share this with all of you because you've been such an important part of my life." The room was filled with profound silence as everyone took in Tohru's words. Yuki's eyes were misty with emotion, and Shigure placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Momiji, ever the sensitive soul, looked at Tohru with admiration. Kazuma, always the voice of wisdom, was the first to speak. "Tohru, we're all so proud of you. It takes incredible courage to face something like this and to share it with those you care about." One by one, the family members expressed their pride and support. Each comment, each word of encouragement built a warm, supportive cocoon around Tohru. When the room fell quiet again, Kyo's voice broke through, filled with heartfelt emotion. "No one is as proud as you as I am, Tohru. You've come so far, and I admire your strength more than words can say." Tohru's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Kyo, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. The comfort and acceptance from her loved ones combined with Kyo's unwavering support made her feel a deep sense of peace. The evening continued with a sense of renewal and warmth. The family celebrated the progress Tohru had made in her journey. The night was filled with laughter, heartfelt conversations, and reaffirmations of the love and support that bound them all together. As the evening drew to a close, Tohru felt a sense of accomplishment and belonging. She had faced her fears, shared her struggles, and received the embrace of her family's unconditional support. The journey was ongoing, but she now faced it with a strengthened heart and the knowledge that she was not alone. Tohru and Kyo stood together, surrounded by their family and friends, the bonds of their love and support weaving a tapestry of hope and resilience for the future. Hi, my name is Angel, and I hope you liked this. If you did, please get a like and subscribe. If you want to hear more, check out my website, or if you want my books in an easier to read format, check out my Wattpad. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!